The battlefield in space was a chaotic mix of flashing lights, blinding explosions, and the distant hum of engines struggling to stay intact. The Vorx Dominion, a fearsome alien species known for their technological superiority, had launched a surprise attack on humanity's outpost at the edge of the galaxy. Human ships, outnumbered and outgunned, scrambled to defend their territory. Among them was Captain Alex Carter, a seasoned pilot who had spent years fighting in the most dangerous space wars humanity had ever faced. His sleek fighter, the Wraith 9, had already taken heavy fire, and the sensors were flashing warnings about critical system malfunctions. His ship was slowing down, but he refused to retreat. This battle wasn't just about survival, it was about proving humanity's will to fight. Alex clenched his fists around the controls as another Vorx fighter came into view. It was a sleek, black vessel, its edges glowing with energy, as if it was alive. The Vorx Black Widow fighters were fast and deadly, and this one was no exception. The enemy ship dove toward him, its weapons lighting up. Alex barely managed to dodge the first blast, but the second hit the Wraith 9's wing, sending it spiraling uncontrollably toward the distant, barren planet below. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced. The planet beneath him was too close, and his ship was no longer under his control. The warning alarms were blaring, but Alex couldn't hear them over the deafening roar of the engine's last breaths. He could see the Vorx fighter tailing him, waiting for the final strike. That's when something unexpected happened, a flash of light, far brighter than anything the Vorx ship could produce, cut through the darkness of space. Alex's ship jolted as the Vorx fighter exploded into 1,000 pieces. For a moment, everything was silent. The pressure of his spiraling descent faded, and the ship was still. He blinked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. As he regained control of the Wraith 9, he looked around, searching for the source of the blast. A shadow moved in the distance, another ship. But this wasn't just any ship. This one shimmered as though it was cloaked, a flicker of light in the darkness. Alex's eyes widened in surprise. The Zerithians. Before he could process what was happening, the cloaked ship appeared directly in front of him, its weapons already locked on to the remaining Vorx fighters. Alex had heard of the Zerithians, an alien species known for their advanced technology and mysterious ways. But to see one in action, saving the human pilot, was something entirely unexpected. The Zerithian ship moved with terrifying precision, dodging enemy fire with ease and taking down the Vorx fighters one by one. Alex's mind raced. Who was this alien, and why was she saving him? He didn't have time to answer that question before the cloaked ship reappeared in front of him. A soft voice crackled through his comms. "Captain Carter, I suggest you stay out of the way for a while. This will be over soon." The voice was calm, almost mechanical, but there was an edge to it, a certain authority. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he heard the command. You're not human." The voice chuckled softly. "I'm not, but I've been known to save a human or two when it suits my purpose." The Zerithian fighter took down the last of the Vorx attackers, and the space around them became eerily quiet. Alex felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. He had just been saved by an alien, a Zerithian, and now the silence was almost as deafening as the battle had been. He brought his Wraith 9 in for a smooth landing, his mind racing. Who was this mysterious pilot? Why had she intervened, and what did she want from him? As his ship touched down, the Zerithian fighter appeared again, this time slowly descending beside him. The ship flickered out of cloak, revealing its sleek, silver design. The craft was unlike anything Alex had ever seen, a true testament to the alien's technological superiority. The cockpit hatch of the Zerithian ship opened, and a figure stepped out. Alex's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, her skin glowing softly in the dim light. She had striking violet eyes, and her hair shimmered with an otherworldly hue. She was tall, slender, and moved with the grace of someone who had been trained for battle from birth. Her gaze met his, and Alex felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about her, something sharp, calculated, and powerful. She wasn't just another soldier. She was a warrior. As he ventured deeper into the canyon, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Strange creatures skittered in the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly as they observed his every move. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the faint smell of danger. Ethan moved cautiously, every step calculated. He had no idea what challenges awaited him, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't fail. For humanity's sake, he couldn't fail. In the distance, he could hear something moving, something large. His heart skipped a beat as the ground beneath him trembled. He wasn't alone in this canyon. The Tikari had unleashed their most dangerous creatures upon him, and he had to fight to survive. He didn't know if he was ready, but he had no choice. The challenge had begun, and there was no turning back now. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped deeper into the canyon. The world around him felt hostile and alien, every rock and gust of wind seeming to challenge his very presence. The red dust beneath his boots shifted with each step, making the ground feel unstable, like it was alive, watching him. His cloaking device buzzed softly, ensuring he was hidden from the creatures that roamed this place. It was a small comfort, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. The Tikari hadn't made this trial easy. No, they'd designed it to break him, to show that humanity didn't belong in a galaxy of powerful species. The canyon stretched endlessly before him, the walls rising high above his head, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow him whole. Ethan adjusted his gear, checking his weapon for the 100th time, even though he knew it wouldn't be enough if he ran into the creatures the Tikari had unleashed. His mind raced as he remembered the warning Naira had given him. Fail, and your death will be your proof. As he walked deeper into the canyon, a strange sense of unease settled over him. The air felt thick, as if it was pressing against him, trying to suffocate him. His breath came in short bursts, and his body felt heavier with every step. He couldn't help but wonder how long he would last in this foreign, unforgiving world. The cloaking device helped keep him hidden, but it wasn't perfect. The Tikari knew the terrain better than anyone, and they were masters of hunting. Even with the technology on his side, Ethan knew he would have to rely on his instincts to survive. The sound of a distant growl snapped him back to reality. Ethan's pulse quickened as he crouched low, scanning the rocky walls for any sign of movement. The creatures that called this canyon home were unlike anything he had ever seen. The Tikari had warned him about the apex predators that stalked the land, but nothing could have prepared him for the terror that gripped him when he finally saw one. A massive creature, its skin a dark, almost obsidian black, emerged from the shadows. It was taller than any human, with long, sharp claws and teeth that gleamed like daggers in the dim light. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow, locking onto Ethan's position. The predator's nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, sensing something was amiss. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized the creature was hunting him. The cloaking device flickered briefly, and in that split second, the predator locked onto him. It charged with terrifying speed, its massive legs pounding against the rocky ground. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he sprinted as fast as he could, his mind focused solely on escape. The creature's roar echoed through the canyon as it chased him, its jaws snapping at the air. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he sprinted, his feet slipping on the uneven terrain. The canyon walls seemed to close in around him, narrowing with each step. He could hear the predator's heavy breathing behind him, each footstep getting closer. The cloaking device was no longer enough to hide him from the creature's keen senses. He needed to think fast. Ahead of him, he spotted a narrow ledge that ran along the side of the canyon wall. Without hesitation, Ethan leaped for it, grabbing onto the jagged rock with both hands. He pulled himself up just as the predator lunged, its claws swiping just inches from his feet. His pulse raced as he scrambled up the ledge, his muscles burning with effort. The creature let out an angry growl below him, pacing back and forth, unable to reach him. For a brief moment, Ethan caught his breath, his hands gripping the rough stone of the canyon wall. He knew he couldn't stay here long. The ledge was narrow, and the predator wouldn't give up easily. He had to keep moving. But as he looked around, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The canyon wasn't empty. Everywhere he looked, he could see more eyes watching him from the darkness. He wasn't just dealing with one predator. There were many. The entire canyon seemed to be alive with creatures, all of them circling, waiting for their chance to strike. Ethan's mind raced. He had to be smarter than the creatures. Strength alone wouldn't save him here. He had to outwit them. He took a deep breath and focused on his surroundings. The narrow ledge that had saved him earlier was his only option. It would be his path through the canyon. But he couldn't afford to slip. If he did, he would fall straight into the waiting jaws of the predators below. As he moved cautiously along the ledge, the growls of the creatures grew louder, and Ethan could feel their eyes on him. Every instinct in his body told him to run, to escape, but he couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, and it would be over. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud screech. One of the creatures had taken a leap of faith and jumped toward him. Ethan barely dodged in time, the creature's claws grazing his arm. He hissed in pain but didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. The predator landed on the ledge, its massive body crashing into the rock just inches from Ethan's feet. The creature roared in frustration, snapping its jaws at him. Ethan's heart pounded, but he stayed focused. He needed to finish this. His training, his instincts, everything he had learned as a soldier came to the forefront. Ethan drew his weapon and fired. The blast hit the predator square in the chest, knocking it back with a roar of pain. But it didn't stop. The creature was wounded, but it was far from defeated. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The canyon was a battlefield, and every step forward would be another challenge. The beast wasn't alone. As the echoes of the shot faded, Ethan realized something. He was in the middle of their territory. The creatures weren't just hunting for food. They were defending their home. Ethan was in their world now, and it was clear that survival wouldn't be easy. He had to keep moving, stay one step ahead, and find a way to outsmart the predators. But as he looked up, he saw Naira watching from the canyon's edge, her cold eyes studying him. He could almost hear her voice in his mind. "Prove yourself, human." He clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about showing the Tikari and the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he moved through the canyon, his mind racing. The creature he had just fought still lingered behind him, nursing its wounds but unwilling to give up the hunt. He had been forced to use his weapon, but now it was becoming clear that he couldn't rely on his gun alone. The Tikari had given him no choice but to prove his worth, and he wasn't about to fail. The canyon seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each step taking him further into the unknown. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the eyes of the predators watching him from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every rock he passed, every rustling sound in the distance, made him tense, expecting an attack. There was no safety in this alien world, only the constant threat of danger. But Ethan wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for humanity's future. He couldn't afford to fail now. His hands ached from gripping the rocky ledge, and his legs burned with exhaustion. The narrow path he was on was growing steeper, the walls of the canyon closing in around him. The ledge was barely wide enough for him to move along, and the slightest misstep could send him tumbling to the canyon floor below. He couldn't afford to slip. If he did, the creatures would be on him in an instant. Suddenly, a noise ahead caught his attention, a low growl. His heart skipped a beat as he spotted movement in the shadows. Two of the predators emerged, their glowing eyes locked on him. They were bigger than the one he had fought earlier, their muscles rippling beneath their dark skin. They were faster, more coordinated, and they were working together. Ethan had never been good at facing multiple opponents at once, and this was no exception. The odds were stacked against him. He didn't have time to think. The creatures lunged forward in perfect sync, their sharp claws aimed straight for him. Ethan dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the first strike. The second predator came at him from the other side, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from his face. He barely managed to duck in time, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to act, and fast. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Ethan grabbed a jagged rock from the ground and hurled it at the first predator. It distracted the creature for just a moment, but that was enough. Ethan sprang into action, moving with all the speed and precision he could muster. He slid under the second predator's swipe, rolled to the side, and then launched himself at the first one. His shoulder slammed into the creature's chest, knocking it off balance. For a moment, everything slowed down. The creature's yellow eyes widened in shock as it stumbled backward, giving Ethan the opening he needed. He reached for his weapon, but it was too late. The second predator was already upon him. Its claws scraped across his arm, leaving deep gashes, but Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain. He wasn't about to let this thing defeat him. Not now. The predators circled him, waiting for an opening. Ethan knew he couldn't let them corner him. He had to think quickly. His mind raced as he recalled everything he had learned about fighting. He wasn't a super soldier, and he didn't have the strength of a Tikari warrior. But what he did have was his intelligence and his ability to adapt. He wasn't going to win by brute force, but by using his surroundings to his advantage. He scanned the canyon walls, looking for anything he could use to his benefit. There, just ahead, was a narrow path that led to a higher ledge. It was risky, but it was his best shot. Ethan didn't hesitate. He made a break for it, sprinting toward the ledge with the predators hot on his heels. His body screamed in pain, but he pushed through, his mind focused only on the goal ahead. As he reached the edge of the path, he leaped for the ledge above him, his fingers scraping against the rough rock. He managed to get a grip, pulling himself up just as the first predator lunged at him. It missed by mere inches, crashing into the canyon floor below. The second predator wasn't far behind, its jaws snapping at the air as it tried to follow. But Ethan was already on the higher ground, his pulse pounding in his ears. He took a moment to catch his breath, his hands trembling from exhaustion and the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The predators had backed off for now, but Ethan knew they were still waiting for an opportunity. They were relentless, and they wouldn't give up easily. He had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. As he moved along the higher ledge, he could hear the sounds of other creatures in the distance. The Tikari hadn't just sent him into a trial. They had thrown him into a battlefield. Every step he took brought him closer to the unknown, closer to whatever other dangers lurked in this deadly terrain. But then, just as he rounded a corner in the canyon, he saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Ahead of him, the terrain shifted. The narrow ledge gave way to a massive drop, and at the bottom of the canyon, he could see something glinting in the dim light. It was a small metallic object, something that looked like it had been left behind. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? The proof Naira had mentioned, the evidence of his survival. It seemed almost too easy, too good to be true, but he couldn't let himself be distracted. He had come too far to let the challenge slip away now. He carefully made his way down toward the object, his every movement calculated. The canyon was still a dangerous place, and the predators weren't far behind. He had no idea what the object was, but he knew one thing for sure. It was his ticket out of this trial. If he could get it and bring it back to Nera, he would prove himself worthy of humanity's place in this galaxy. But just as he reached for the object, a growl sounded behind him. The predators were back, and they were angrier than ever. The real test wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The growl echoed through the canyon, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. The two predators had returned, their eyes glowing with malice. This time, they weren't just after him. They were hunting in full force. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had come so far, but now it seemed like the odds were turning against him. The object he had found in the canyon floor was within reach, but the predators were closing in fast. If he didn't act quickly, he would never get the chance to prove himself. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Ethan saw the two predators moving in from either side, their claws scraping against the rocky ground as they circled him. They were bigger, faster, and more determined than ever. The battle wasn't going to be won through brute force. Ethan knew he had to outsmart them. But how? The narrow canyon walls offered little room for maneuvering, and his back was pressed against the steep drop that led to the canyon floor below. He had no choice but to face them head-on. He looked down at the object in his hands, the metallic item he had discovered earlier. It was small but solid, its surface smooth and shiny. Ethan had no idea what it was, but there was a part of him that felt it held the key to everything. Naira had mentioned the need for proof of his survival, and this object could be exactly what she was looking for. He couldn't let it slip away now. But getting it back to her alive was a much bigger challenge than he had anticipated. The predators began to close in on him, their movements slow and deliberate. They were sizing him up, watching his every move. They knew he was exhausted from the battle, and they were waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan's mind raced as he weighed his options. There had to be something, anything, that could give him the upper hand. Then, without warning, one of the predators lunged at him. Its claws raked through the air, and Ethan barely managed to duck in time. He felt the wind from the creature's swipe brush against his face, and his heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't going to survive if he kept dodging. He needed to take control of the situation, and he needed to do it now. Ethan's eyes scanned the canyon walls again. This time, he saw it, an overhang above him, a rocky ledge that was just big enough for him to climb to. It wasn't a perfect escape, but it was his only chance. Without wasting a second, he made a run for it, pushing his legs to move faster despite the pain in his muscles. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body screaming in protest, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The predators were right behind him, their growls and heavy footsteps echoing in his ears. He reached the ledge, his hand scraping the rough surface as he hauled himself upward. He had to make it. He had no other choice. But just as his fingers brushed the edge of the rock, the second predator lunged forward, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his feet. Ethan kicked out with all his strength, landing a blow to the creature's chest. It staggered back, momentarily stunned, giving him the precious seconds he needed to climb the rest of the way to safety. With a final burst of effort, Ethan hauled himself onto the ledge and collapsed, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He had made it, but the predators weren't far behind. One of them was still pacing below, its glowing eyes locked on him, while the other circled above, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan was cornered. He could hear their growls growing louder, their anticipation building. He had been in close quarters with danger before, but this was different. These creatures weren't just hunting him. They were testing him. They wanted to see if he was worthy. Worthy of what? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure. If he didn't find a way to turn the tide in his favor, he would be their next victim. His mind raced. The object in his hand. What was it? Was it more than just a simple relic? Could it be a weapon? A tool? Something that could give him an edge against the predators? He didn't know, but he couldn't afford to stand around and think for too long. Time was running out, and the creatures were closing in. Ethan's grip tightened around the object, his fingers digging into its smooth surface. There had to be something he was missing, some way to use it. He had heard stories of ancient alien technology, weapons left behind by long-dead civilizations, but he had never believed they were real. Could this be one of them? He wasn't sure, but he had no choice but to try. He pressed the object against the rock face, his thumb instinctively brushing across a strange symbol etched into the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the object began to glow. The light was faint at first, but it quickly grew brighter, casting an eerie blue glow across the canyon. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. The object was activating. Suddenly, a force field shot up around him, the air vibrating with energy. The predators froze, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had never encountered anything like this before. The force field was holding them back, but Ethan didn't know how long it would last. The object had given him a temporary advantage, but he still had to figure out how to use it to his benefit. With the predators momentarily stalled, Ethan knew he had to act quickly. He didn't know how long the shield would hold, but he couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. The glowing object in his hands was now pulsing with energy, and Ethan realized it wasn't just a shield. It was a weapon capable of taking on the creatures hunting him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. This was the turning point. With the predator's eyes locked on him, and the force field keeping them at bay, he now had the chance to prove himself. But first, he had to make it out alive. The force field surrounding Ethan hummed with energy, its light casting strange shadows across the narrow canyon walls. The predators circled below, their glowing eyes fixed on him. For a brief moment, everything was still. The sound of his rapid breathing was the only thing breaking the silence. The shield had bought him some time, but time was a luxury he couldn't afford. He knew this calm wouldn't last long. The predators were relentless, and soon enough, they would figure out how to breach the shield. He needed to end this now. Ethan gripped the glowing object tightly, feeling the pulse of energy running through it. The object in his hands wasn't just a shield, it was far more than that. The vibrations it sent through his fingers made his pulse quicken. It was as if it had a life of its own, responding to his every thought and movement. He could feel it, deep within him, calling out for action. This was his chance, his one shot at surviving and proving himself. He didn't have much time to think. The predators were growing restless. One of them let out a low growl, the sound echoing off the canyon walls as it prowled closer to the force field. Ethan could see its eyes narrow, the creature's intelligence clear in the way it studied the shield, trying to figure out a way around it. The other predator joined its companion, the two of them now working together, their movements synchronized as they stalked the edge of the glowing barrier. Ethan's heart pounded, knowing that at any moment they could break through. With a sudden movement, the first predator lunged, swiping its claws at the shield. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the barrier shimmered violently in response. Ethan staggered back, nearly losing his footing on the rocky ledge. The shield was holding, but the force of the blow made him realize just how powerful these creatures were. He had to end this quickly before they wore him down. He could hear their growls growing louder, their anticipation building. He had been in close quarters with danger before, but this was different. These creatures weren't just hunting him. They were testing him. They wanted to see if he was worthy. Worthy of what? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for sure. If he didn't find a way to turn the tide in his favor, he would be their next victim. His mind raced. The object in his hand. What was it? Was it more than just a simple relic? Could it be a weapon? A tool? Something that could give him an edge against the predators? He didn't know, but he couldn't afford to stand around and think for too long. Time was running out, and the creatures were closing in. Ethan's grip tightened around the object, his fingers digging into its smooth surface. There had to be something he was missing, some way to use it. He had heard stories of ancient alien technology, weapons left behind by long-dead civilizations, but he had never believed they were real. Could this be one of them? He wasn't sure, but he had no choice but to try. He pressed the object against the rock face, his thumb instinctively brushing across a strange symbol etched into the surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the object began to glow. The light was faint at first, but it quickly grew brighter, casting an eerie blue glow across the canyon. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening. The object was activating. Suddenly, a force field shot up around him, the air vibrating with energy. The predators froze, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had never encountered anything like this before. The force field was holding them back, but Ethan didn't know how long it would last. The object had given him a temporary advantage, but he still had to figure out how to use it to his benefit. With the predators momentarily stalled, Ethan knew he had to act quickly. He didn't know how long the shield would hold, but he couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. The glowing object in his hands was now pulsing with energy, and Ethan realized it wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon capable of taking on the creatures hunting him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. This was the turning point. With the predator's eyes locked on him, and the force field keeping them at bay, he now had the chance to prove himself. But first, he had to make it out alive. The force field surrounding Ethan hummed with energy, its light casting strange shadows across the narrow canyon walls. The predators circled below, their glowing eyes fixed on him. For a brief moment, everything was still. The sound of his rapid breathing was the only thing breaking the silence. The shield had bought him some time, but time was a luxury he couldn't afford. He knew this calm wouldn't last long. The predators were relentless, and soon enough, they would figure out how to breach the shield. He needed to end this now. Ethan gripped the glowing object tightly, feeling the pulse of energy running through it. The object in his hands wasn't just a shield, it was far more than that. The vibrations it sent through his fingers made his pulse quicken. It was as if it had a life of its own, responding to his every thought and movement. He could feel it, deep within him, calling out for action. This was his chance, his one shot at surviving and proving himself. He didn't have much time to think. The predators were growing restless. One of them let out a low growl, the sound echoing off the canyon walls as it prowled closer to the force field. Ethan could see its eyes narrow, the creature's intelligence clear in the way it studied the shield, trying to figure out a way around it. The other predator joined its companion, the two of them now working together, their movements synchronized as they stalked the edge of the glowing barrier. Ethan's heart pounded, knowing that at any moment they could break through. With a sudden movement, the first predator lunged, swiping its claws at the shield. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the barrier shimmered violently in response. Ethan staggered back, nearly losing his footing on the rocky ledge. The shield was holding, but the force of the blow made him realize just how powerful these creatures were. He had to end this quickly before they wore him down.